get myself set up here. Okay, checking. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. This is a pretty rare occasion for me. As you can see, I dressed up for it. So, just want to start off today with my talk about oral history and its importance by going back in time a little bit to when I was a teacher in the city schools of Decatur. And a few years ago, I was a special ed teacher at the upper elementary school level, which is grades 3, 4, and 5. And in the process of the day, like at the beginning of each morning, our school would play basically community announcements. It would be kind of the morning news for the kids. And they would have a variety of segments. They'd have announcements of upcoming events that were coming to the school. They would have recognition of particular students and sometimes faculty who had done some pretty extraordinary things. There would be, of course, the lunch menu announced each morning, which was a popular segment, as you might imagine. They would announce birthdays, which you could always tell when a class nearby had a birthday boy or girl because there would be a loud cheer coming from down the hall somewhere. But surprisingly, one of the most beloved segments in the morning announcements was Today in History. And part of it was because they had music. Music behind pretty much all the segments, but it was the choice of music for history that I think was a winner for the kids, because it was a song from the musical Hamilton called "History Has Its Eyes on You." If you're not familiar, excuse me, I'm tearing up a little bit. I don't know why, but I'm tearing up a little bit. If you're not familiar with the musical, this particular song is basically George Washington talking to Alexander Hamilton about his first command in the French and Indian War, which turned out badly. And he felt that history had judged and would continue to judge him for this error in his life. And he's basically telling Hamilton that now it's his turn to take his place in history and to be careful that history will be judging him. And part of the lyrics go, "Let me tell you what I wish I'd known when I was young and dreamed of glory. You have no control who lives, who dies, who tells your story. I know that we can win. I know that greatness lies in you. But remember, from here on in, history has its eyes on you." Pretty potent stuff, especially when you hear a group of fifth graders singing along with it. Because it's like, oh my gosh, guys, when you get a little older, you're going to really get the brunt of that. And as for me, I have always been a history buff. Like, it's pretty much ingrained in my DNA at this point. I had the benefit of having oral tradition passed down to me through my parents, through my grandparents, and in particular, a relative of mine that I knew was Aunt Erlene. She was my grand aunt or great aunt, depending on how you break that down. My grandfather's sister, essentially. But Aunt Erlene was the family historian, and she knew all about the family, going all the way back to when we came overseas from Ireland. You know, she knew about my great-great-grandfather, George Washington McGuire, who fought in the Civil War, and his son, George Washington Jr., who basically founded all of the institutions in our little, now non-existent town of Dark Ridge, North Carolina. It was fascinating just to listen to her tell these stories of my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, all the way back and back and back. It was a fascinating listen, for sure. And that historical interest stayed with me through the years. When I enrolled in college, originally, I was a history major, partially because my dad said, well, you know, if you study history at USC Aiken, then they don't have a law school there, but you could take your degree and apply to law school and become a lawyer and work in real estate law. And being the young, malleable kid that I was, I said, okay. And, you know, of course, a couple of years later, I would get interested in theater, and my whole world just changed. But I still had that passion for learning history, for learning information about the past and about past cultures and peoples. And surprisingly, theater gave me that opportunity as well, because I was able to play historical figures and participants in historical events throughout the years. My professional theater career was essentially playing these historical figures in historical outdoor dramas. You know, that's a whole other talk and a whole other story. But back at USC Aiken, I eventually, because I kind of took my time in college. I was on what my professor called the 10-year plan. But I ended up being the historian for our theater group on 3 different occasions. So that kind of solidified my history bona fides in a way. And when my family and I came to Atlanta even, the first job I had when we moved here was I was a history researcher for a book company here in Atlanta that was doing a series of books looking at the histories of different college football programs, which was fascinating because I got to touch all these different relics of these football programs. I took pictures of jerseys and different programs, and I got to hold a Heisman Trophy, which is an incredibly heavy thing. And I also broke a national championship trophy, but you know that's. But it all came out in the wash. But kind of steering myself back into the crux of things. In recent times, recent years, I've kind of been in a little bit of a doldrums as far as having creative motivations or outlets or ways to kind of maintain and connect with other people. And in June of this year, I was contacted by a friend of mine from college. Her name's Brenda Ford, and she works for StoryCorps Atlanta. And if you don't know what StoryCorps is, it's an oral history project. And just to kind of clarify here, there is a difference between oral history and oral tradition. Oral tradition is the passing along of history strictly by word of mouth. It's one person saying to another, hey, this is what happened, blah, 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 blah. Oral history is the recording of history, like so. I'm recording this right now, in fact. But it's getting that voice, and at times even the face of the person speaking, so that you have a record that you can go back and listen and watch and learn. So StoryCorps was founded in 2003 as a way to gather these stories and to have them recorded for posterity, for future generations to come back and look at. The stories themselves, once they're recorded, they are placed in the Library of Congress in Washington. And it kind of has, like, oral history itself has it's kind of become a more important thing in the past few decades, as long as technology has advanced and audio recording techniques have come about. And one of the first real efforts at making oral history a thing happened in the 1930s with the Federal Writers Project. And one of the things that they did, this was a Depression-era program started by FDR in order to give writers an outlet and a way that they can be paid to do the thing that they were good at. And one of the things they did was they recorded slave narratives, which were the stories of people of African American descent who were still alive and remembered being slaves in the American South prior to and during the Civil War. So they got stories of life on different farms or in houses where they were, unpaid servants to the white aristocracy, and how they had to get through their lives and what it felt like to witness the war happening, sometimes literally in their backyards, and how they managed to be emancipated by the end of the war. So not just in the US, but throughout the world, there have been efforts to capture these voices and capture these images of people throughout history as they recollect different events. In Great Britain, there started off an effort by the military bureau there to get the voices of veterans of the First World War and the Irish Revolution, which liberated that country most of that country from British rule. But getting back to StoryCorps, it was founded in 2003 in order to get all these desperate voices together to tell their stories and share them. And to this date, there have been over 250,000 voices that have been recorded and archived in the Library of Congress for future use. And the StoryCorps has a variety of programs that they do. And some of it is large things like memories of 9/11, or talking to military veterans about their experiences in Iraq or Afghanistan. But there are also other very important projects like the Stonewall Out Loud project, which collected LGBTQ voices on the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Rebellion back in 2019. Or StoryCorps Griot, which concentrated on gathering African American voices. StoryCorps Justice, which talked to youth of color and got their experiences of dealing with the American justice system. And one recent development they've started to develop is called One Small Step, which is where they take people of opposing viewpoints or opposing political opinions, opposing social I can't think of the word, but basically people who have different points of view regarding different issues, and getting them together to talk things over and to see the humanity of one another, which I think is an incredibly important thing in a day and age in which we are incredibly divided. Talking over things is a luxury sometimes that we don't take enough of an advantage of, I think. But that's just my preaching right now. But one thing I've learned in working with StoryCorps is there is room in this world, not just for the big history stories, not just for things about the election or about the latest disaster or the COVID outbreak or what have you, but also there's room for getting the small stories, the things that we tend to overlook, the everyday life. And we could even see that going into our own history, literary history, in fact. You know, two of the great works that we learn in high school, that we read, are diaries of ordinary people. I'm talking about Samuel Pepys back in the 1600s, who talked about life in Great Britain. And of course, you know, the Holocaust Remembrance Movement benefited immensely from the diary of a young girl living in an attic in Amsterdam in the early 1940s, Anne Frank. It's so those small things, those little details are so important sometimes. But anyway, I'm saying all that to say this. My friend Brenda contacted me and said, I've got this idea for a project. What about if you were there for a long time in the theater program, you're involved, and you got to know a lot of people. What if we got interviews with those people and maybe some others that came after you and got an oral history of the theater program at the University of South Carolina at Aiken? I said, well, sounds okay, I guess. So I posted to our alumni site on Facebook. I said, hey, is anybody interested in talking to me about your experiences? And I got some really good positive feedback on that. People said, hey, yeah, I'd like to talk. One of the first people that I talked to was a friend of mine who I met near the end of my time at USC Aiken, who graduated after me, and he went on to become a voice artist, an actor. He actually gained a little bit of fame by becoming the voice of a major character in a very popular video game called Red Dead Redemption. And that was great. And that kind of sparked other people to go, okay, I feel like I can share my story. And to this date, I've had a dozen stories that I have recorded and have been or will be released. And the big thing about these stories is that they're very eye-opening. Jan talked a little bit about the subjectivity of history, and it's amazing sometimes listening to these stories just how many perspectives there are regarding a shared event. My theater professor would talk about something and he'd say, well, this happened and that happened and blah, blah, blah. And, it was an interesting time. And then a couple weeks later, I would talk to somebody who was at that same, in that same play or at that same conference, and they'd go, oh, I can see where that happened, but this is what my memory of it was. And they would go on and talk about something that was pretty close, but had some little differences. And of course, I had my own memories in many cases where I'm going, did that really happen? Wow, okay, I forgot about that. God. So it's been an amazing journey, and one that I'm still working on right now. But this oral history has kind of spilled over even into my own personal life. Almost 2 weeks ago, Kathy and I learned that a friend of ours, who we worked with at Horn in the West, which was the outdoor drama where she and I met, he passed away from cancer. And it was kind of a matter of timing, because I had talked to Kathy just a couple of days before about, hey, I got a little bit of a hole in this podcast I'm doing, and I kind of need an interview. Would you mind talking? She said, yeah, sure. What would I talk about? And I said, well, I don't know, talk about music or, work or, your pets or something. But this gave that, as sad as it was, the passing of our friend Wes gave us an opportunity to sit down and really talk over the story of that summer at Horn in the West, and how she became involved, how I became involved, the experiences we had running around on stage and firing black powder rifles and singing songs and dressing up as really, in retrospect, inappropriate Native American costumes. But it was great fun just to kind of sit and reminisce and get those memories down, so that one day, God willing, Ian becomes a father or a grandfather. Somewhere down the road, they might say, "What was great grandma Kathy like? Or what was Grandpa Clint like?" And he can present this and say, well, this is what they said. I don't know if it's true, but this is what they said. But yeah, oral history really has a place in our culture and in our society. And I feel like it's an incredibly important thing, especially in this day and age, in which the act of learning itself can be seen as a political act. We have these battles going on in our school boards and in schools themselves over what to teach and when to teach and how to teach it. And things have just gotten really knotted up in this incredible political monster. And we need a way to bypass that monster so that we can say, well, that's what they say in schools now, and what they're allowed to say, but this is what we experienced. And that first-person experience, I think, is going to be the thing that really keeps us alive as a culture and as a country. And as long as we can get together one-on-one and we can say, remember when, then true oral history and true oral tradition will never die. So just remember, history has its eyes on you. Thank you.
You made me think of a lot of things.